Hi, my name is Mark Hemsworth, and I've been interested in Formula One since I was 4 years old. But it wasn't until 1996 I got my big break to join a Formula One team. Since then, I've been race and test team coordinator and test team manager. In my testing role, I've got to work with some great drivers: Damon Hill, Mika Salo, Jos Verstappen and Pedro de la Rosa. I also work very closely with the race and test engineers and the data engineers who are working on the car setups. It's only through achieving a good car setup that we can improve on-track performance. People often ask me, why do you work in Formula One? It's such a stressful environment and you work massively long hours. Well, my answer to them is simple. When you see your car lined up on the grid for the first race of a fresh season, all that stress just melts away. And if you can come out of that race with a points or podium finish, well, that's just an added bonus. You've probably had the opportunity to look inside a Formula One car before, so let's take a quick tour around the car and look at the various areas where you can make adjustments. This is the front wing, and here is the adjustable flap. Increasing the angle reduces high-speed understeer. Decreasing the angle reduces high-speed oversteer and reduces drag. In general, use as much flap angle as possible without affecting the rear downforce. With the rear wing, you'll set the downforce level on the car. With the smallest wing angles, you get the highest top speeds, and the least drag, and the least downforce. By increasing the wing angle, you'll get more downforce, but your top speed will suffer. In general, use as much rear wing angle as possible and balance it with the front flap. Underneath this cover, we have the front suspension. Here are the springs, dampers, bump rubbers, and packers. And here are the potentiometers for the front suspension movement measurement. Underneath the small cover, we have the front anti-roll bar. Springs are the primary means of supporting the weight of the car. A heavier spring promotes understeer, but allows us to set a lower front ride height, which reduces understeer. A lighter front spring reduces understeer, but means that we have to have a higher ride height. In general, use the heaviest possible front spring to achieve a low ride height. Dampers absorb energy from riding over bumps in the road surface. By increasing the stiffness, you will get better turning, but you will get very poor response over the bumps and curbs. By softening the front damper, you will get better front-end grip. In general, use as soft as possible for best front-end grip. Roll bars control the weight transfer from side to side when the car is cornering. A heavier roll bar promotes understeer, but improves turn-in and makes the car what's called pointy. A lighter roll bar reduces understeer. In general, use as stiff an anti-roll bar as possible for good turn-in and balance out the understeer effect. Removing the engine cover, we have the rear dampers, rear springs, rear anti-roll bars, and the potentiometers for the rear suspension movement measurement. This is the rear damper. Increasing the stiffness, the traction will reduce, but gives you very good high-speed corner stability. Softening the damper will give you better traction, but very poor high-speed stability. In general, use as hard as possible for good high-speed stability. Here's the rear spring. A heavier rear spring promotes oversteer, or less understeer, but reduces traction. A lighter rear spring reduces oversteer but promotes understeer with the trade-off of better traction. In general, use the softest springs for best traction. Here's the rear anti-roll bar. A heavier roll bar reduces understeer and promotes oversteer, but does reduce traction. A lighter roll bar increases understeer, but will improve traction. In general, use as soft a roll bar as possible to improve traction. Okay, now you've had a good look round a Formula One car. I hope this allows you to visualise the components that you'll be making changes to within the car setup menus. Car setup is an important aspect within Formula One and will directly affect your on-track performance. Each individual circuit has its own set of characteristics that you'll need to think about when coming up with a car setup. As well as that, there are weather conditions that need to be taken into account. Wet weather, dry weather, and you need to have setup changes to allow for both conditions. Within car setup, there are two distinct areas. There's the aero, which can be altered using the front and the rear wings, and there is the mechanical grip that can be altered using the dampers, the roll bars, and adjusting the ride height. Please remember though, when making changes to car setup, make one change at a time and quantify that change, be it a gain or a loss, before moving on to the next change. If you make too many changes, you can very easily get lost in car setup. For high-speed Hockenheim, we need to get maximum straight line speed from the car, and this can only be achieved by reducing the drag to a minimum. This is done by lowering the front and rear wing. However, this may promote understeer, and to control that, you may want to lower the ride height of the car, but be careful, don't go too low, as your plank may be illegal at the end of the race. Now for the gear ratios. Set the gears to hit the rev limiter at the end of the fastest straight. Having set this point, then evenly space all the other ratios to give you a nice smooth power delivery. For slow such as Hungary or Monaco, we need to run maximum downforce on the car. You will need to increase the front and rear wing angle to their maximum extent. To improve traction out of slow speed corners, why not try softening the springs on the rear end? To set the gears, find the fastest part of the circuit, and you should be just hitting the rev limiter at this point. Having set this, evenly spread all the other gear ratios to give you good even acceleration out of a slow speed corner. Qualifying position for Sunday's race. It's absolutely vital you go into this session with the best setup possible. Use the practice sessions before qualifying to adjust your setup to achieve your maximum performance. In qualifying, run your car as light as possible. That means put in the least amount of fuel for the number of laps you intend to complete during an individual run. Also fit new tyres. These will give you the best grip and allow you to maximise your performance. The higher your grid position, the higher the likelihood of you scoring points within the race. How do you change up to a wet setup on the car? Obviously in the wet, there's less grip. To counter this, you need to increase the downforce on the front and rear wing elements. You can achieve this by increasing the angle of both of those elements. In addition, you can soften the springs. Softening the springs improves the traction, but there is a danger. Soften too much and you will lower your ride height, and in monsoon conditions you may aquaplane off the circuit. There are 4 types of tyre available to you: dry tyre, intermediate, wet, and the monsoon tyre. On dry tarmac, use the dry tyre because it has the best grip and the biggest contact patch with the tarmac. If there's a little bit of water on the tarmac, use the intermediate tyre. It has cuts in it to disperse some of the water away, but it will still last on a drying surface. Be careful on a drying circuit that you don't overheat them. so use the wet line on straights. In normal wet conditions, the wet tyres offer the best compromise between grip and water dispersal. The monsoon tyres are designed for very heavy wet conditions. These tyres will disperse a lot of water, but they're too soft to be run on a dry or drying surface. Okay, it's Sunday afternoon. Your car's sat on the grid. You can see what the weather is like at the moment, but you've been handed a weather forecast that says the weather may change. Do you go dry setup or wet setup? And what tyres do you fit? Well, if you're at the front end of the grid, you'll probably opt for a low-risk strategy. That means going for a tyre and a setup for the conditions as they are at that moment in time. However, if you're at the back of the grid or a little bit further forward, you may opt for a high-risk strategy. The high risk is putting tyres and setup for something that may happen in the future, according to that weather forecast. And who knows, this may pay dividends. There's points to be scored and possibly a podium. From this view, the pit stops can seem to be nothing more than an explosion of chaos. They are in fact a series of well-planned actions carried out by a highly rehearsed team. The car is controlled in the pit stop by a lollipop held by one of the crew. Both the crew's and driver's safety is totally in the hands of the lollipop man. Any mistake could cause serious injury. The driver will only respond to commands on the lollipop and ignore any other signal. The lollipop man stands in the fast track of the pit lane and shows the driver where he should pull into the pit stop box. As soon as the car turns in, he jogs to the front of the pit box and places the end of the lollipop onto the car nose with the word brake facing the driver. This is an instruction to the driver to keep his foot on the brake and to prevent the wheels from turning during the wheel change. The front jackman's job is to raise the front of the car and support it while the wheels are changed. Meanwhile, the rear jackman has to follow the car into the box and locate the rear jack onto the lifting point at the back. He must only lift the car after the front of the car has been raised. If he lifts too early, the front jack will not lift the front of the car. The gunmen have the most sought-after jobs in the pit crew. They are responsible for releasing and securing the wheel nuts as fast as possible. As the car comes to a halt, they follow the wheel in with their guns at the ready and will often be undoing the nut before the car has even come to a stop. Once the nut is free of the axle, the gunman pulls the gun clear of the wheel, allowing the wheel-off man to remove it. The nut remains in the socket of the gun and is retained by magnets. The wheel-on man places the new wheel onto the car and the nut is gunned up tight. The gunman activates the wheel nut retention system and raises his hand to signal to the lollipop man that he is finished. The jackmen watch for this signal. When they see the raised hands of the two nearest wheelmen, they lower the jacks. The refuelling rig is one piece of equipment that is standard between all the teams. 4 crew are required to run it. Starting from inside the pit garage, one man programs the rig with the amount of fuel needed for the stop, whilst another, crouched by the rig, is the dead man handle operator, whose job it is to keep the fuel valve open. In the event of an emergency, this spring-loaded handle would be released, closing the flow of fuel to the car to minimise any fire hazard. 2 men are required to operate the nozzle. One supports the fuel hose, connecting the rig to the nozzle, as this becomes very heavy once the fuel is flowing. The second operates the nozzle itself. When the lollipop man sees the rear end gunman's hands raised, he twists the lollipop round to show the message, first gear. The driver knows the end of the stop is imminent. He selects first gear and keeps the revs height to avoid a stall. The lollipop man's attention is now divided between the nozzle man and the pit lane. He's in a mental loop, constantly revising whether it's safe for the crew and the driver for him to release the car. As soon as he sees the nozzle man is safe and the pit lane is clear of other cars, he'll raise the lollipop. When the driver sees this signal, he releases the clutch and the car screams out of the box, leaving the pit crew in a cloud of smoke. As you can see, there's a great deal that happens during even a routine pit stop, and its success depends on the combined efforts of over 20 crew working together to ensure it all goes without a hitch. The pressure on every individual is immense, and one mistake can ruin a driver's race. It's very much a team sport, and nowhere is this better demonstrated than during the pit stop. More than 20 members of a race team must complete the well-drilled routine to service the car in the shortest possible time. Speed and accuracy are essential, as overtaking on the track has become so difficult that a well-timed, efficient pit stop can often be the team's best opportunity to gain track position. In deciding your strategy, you are essentially trying to determine what will take the least amount of time overall during a race. Few stops with a slower, heavier car, or more stops with a lighter, faster car. So how do you decide on the perfect strategy? Do you one stop, two stop, or even three? Well, here are some simple guidelines to help you. Assuming you're considering a one-stop strategy, ask yourself this question: can the car carry enough fuel to run to the halfway point in the race? If the answer is no, then you need to look at a two-stop strategy. However, if the answer is yes, then you need to decide if your lap times on a heavy fuel load and one pit stop will be faster overall than your lap times on a lighter fuel load and two pit stops. One stop does not allow pit stop flexibility, but runs less risk as the car is only stationary once. If you find yourself considering two stops, then think about these factors. How much time is spent in the pit lane at this particular circuit? If the time is shorter than normal, you may consider a three-stop strategy. Again, you must decide if your lap times on a two-stop strategy will be faster overall than your lap times on a very light fuel load with three pit stops. Two stops do allow greater flexibility in deciding when to pit. This decision can be affected by unpredictable factors such as traffic and weather. Three stops allow you to run an extremely light car with high levels of grip from the tyres. This strategy works well if you're at the front of the grid and the car can run unhindered by traffic. Using these simple guidelines, you should be able to determine your own pit stop strategy. However, keep in mind that this doesn't take into account important factors such as tyre wear or fuel consumption. But then, not even the teams who use complex mathematical models can come up with the perfect strategy.